There we go. Whenever you're ready. Yeah. No, we're good. A little feedback. Nope. Okay, we may have to use the handheld.
All right, everyone. Welcome to our panel today, the final panel here at the STEM Book Fest. We were talking all about science and pop culture. My name is David Montgomery. I'm a local journalist and podcaster, and I'll be moderating this panel. The three people you are here to see and hear from, and not being me, James Michaelios, Meg Hofdahl, and Kelly Florence. They'll talk a little bit more about themselves as we get going. But rather than read out elaborate pre-written introductions, I thought I'd start us off with sort of an icebreaker. We can sort of start at the end with James and move down. You can talk about one work of pop culture that you think does a particularly good or particularly bad job of handling science.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to focus on the good because I don't see any job. You know, it's no fun to be just going to, well, this is impossible. That could never happen. What's the deal with the Hulk's pants anyway? Unstable molecule. Anyway, and in terms of like what is the most realistic, so I wrote the book, The Physics of Superheroes. I have a new book out, The Physics of Superheroes Goes Hollywood. So let me focus on superhero movies. Most people think Batman is very realistic, but the number of times that he's been knocked unconscious in his 80 plus years of fighting crime and hasn't suffered permanent brain damage suggests he's had some sort of like Homer Simpson panning or something. Anyway, I would say, particularly in the movie version, the first Iron Man movie, 2008. There we see the only suspension of disbelief you have to really make is that he's made an arc reactor that puts out the power of 3 nuclear power plants and is the size of a hockey puck. But aside from that, pretty much a lot of things are right. We see him beta testing the suit when he gets back, when he's out of a cave. And which, you know, you see the scientist, the superhero's engineer, and the engineer is superhero. And one point I just want to highlight is that we see in a scene Tony Stark building the Iron Man suit, and he's doing some soldering, and he's using the same soldering iron that I have in my lab, and he's doing it right. I'm probably the only person who went to see Iron Man and got excited over the soldering.
Well, first I want to, this is kind of a side note. My husband's a medical doctor, and anytime I have a medical show on, he rolls his eyes. But there's one medical show lately that I had on, and he was like, wow, they're actually talking like doctors. And that was The Pit, if anyone's seen that one. Anytime like I watch House or Grey's Anatomy or anything, he's like, oh my God, I can't. But The Pit is doctor approved. But we met because many years ago, because we loved a show called The X-Files. Now, of course, it would be silly to say that everything in X-Files is scientifically true and can happen. And we're going to get into, hopefully talk about it more, something called the Scully effect, which is actually a true academic research that was done by the Gina Davis Institute that has to do with women appearing in STEM roles on television. But I think The X-Files is my favorite representation of science. Is it the best? Do they do it the best? I don't know, but I sure love Dr. Dr. Scully.
James, when you talked about Batman getting concussions, it reminded me of one of my other favorite TV shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy and all of her friends got a concussion at least once a week, and somehow they went back and fought the monsters. I don't know, so I don't think that's
Shake it off.
yeah, totally fine. But one thing that we wrote about in our book, The Science of Witchcraft, is, and I've seen a lot of details about this here on the property, is medicinal plants. And we interviewed an indigenous ethnobotanist and talking about, witch potions and all of these spooky things. And it's based on science and it's real. And so I think that we dismiss it because it's women doing things with herbs, and really it's not.
All right, I'll throw out a plug for one of my favorite movies, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, which is all about ships firing cannons at each other, but features a subplot about featuring surgery and a trip to the Galapagos Islands a generation before Darwin. It all happened very accurately. Very different from Iron Man in many ways, but similar in others. So let's go down in the other direction now. Some people might think, we're watching these superhero movies or horror movies or reading horror books or whatever. Why can't we just turn our brain off and enjoy the fun? Why are you talking to us about science and stuff that's behind it? So how does looking at science help us enjoy these stories, in your opinion?
So I think one thing that came out a lot when our book, The Science of Stephen King, came out, is a lot of Stephen King fans said, well, I don't want you to ruin the books and the movies for me. Like, don't ruin it. And we encourage them, actually, it's going to make your viewing or your reading even better. Because finding out the things that these stories and these monsters and these phenomenon are based on, that is true. Truth can be scarier than fiction. And we love to pull on those threads and go down a rabbit hole and realize Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, came from Wes Craven reading an article about Laotian immigrants coming to the United States, and they thought they were dying of the dacha, a sleep demon, but it was cardiac arrhythmia and sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome for this group of Asian men specifically from Laos. And so Wes Craven read that and thought, what if there was a guy who could kill you in your sleep? Hence Freddy Krueger was born. So it's based on a true scientific principle.
And I think as, the audience, I think that sort of what the wonderful thing is that you can sort of take what you want and leave what you don't want. Like, we interviewed a physicist about time travel for the book 11/22/63 for our Stephen King book. And a lot of that stuff, honestly, I mean, it's very esoteric, it's hard to understand, but fundamentally time travel is something that's so damn cool that we all want to know a little bit more about. And so I love that there's sort of this accessible way to access science and what we're watching. And like Kelly said, I mean, truth really is stranger than fiction. So there's so much to sort of a thread to take and be inspired as well as creators. I write fiction. And I know I can see something in the news about science, I can learn something, and it's like, okay, that's creepy. How can I use that?
It's a good question, and the notion of ruining something, comes up a lot. I have to say that when I go to the movies, I'm a fan, and so I don't go to the movie theater with a pad of paper and a calculator and say, ooh, my physics sense is tingling. Rather, when you see something that's right from a science point of view, it's like, ooh, catching a little Easter egg or some sort of, hidden treasure. And I say, oh, I gotta remember that. Put it in another book. I've done some science consulting through the National Academy of Sciences Science and Entertainment Exchange. This is pro bono work that a lot of scientists do to answer questions from Hollywood creators of TV shows and movies. And the question is, why do they bother? And partly it's because they know that anytime the audience is questioning the science that they see on the screen is a moment when they're not paying attention to the story. If you see something that is just so egregiously bad that it takes you out of the picture, that they want to avoid. They're not going to get something 100% right. They call those refrigerator plot errors, plot holes. Right? When you go home, you reach into the refrigerator for a drink, and you say, "Wait a minute, that's okay," right? But they don't want it to happen while you're watching the movie, and so they're trying to create a believable fake reality, and in that way, they want to get certain things right, like the soldering.
Side note, one thing I hear a lot from people too is like when the people are playing instruments in movies and they do it incorrectly, like that's not who played the violin. That's why, shout out to my hometown boy, Bob Dylan. Timothy Chalamet played him and he learned how to play the harmonica and guitar for it, so let's go.
They still overdub often the sound, but it is important that the actor looks like they're going through the motions correctly. Verisimilitude, I think, is the term that you don't necessarily need to be accurate, but it needs to feel accurate to the audience. They have something that takes them out. So we're talking about accuracy. Some people might say that, talking about these speculative fiction works, there are some that are very close to real science. There's usually a point of departure or a point of speculation where they make something up that isn't real. But some of these works stay really close to the science other than that point of departure. And others are just completely fantastical and just making stuff up because it sounds cool. As people who studied the science and pop culture, do you think the more accurate stuff is better because it's more accurate? Or is there a relation between that? We start with James at the end.
I think a lot of it would just depend on the story and how well they're telling what they're telling. What I do in the physical superheroes is I grant each character a one-time miracle exemption from the laws of nature, and say, well, if you were super strong, stretch like a rubber band, run at super speed, could you run across the ocean, catch bullets in the air, drag people behind you in your wake? Yes, all things that are correct from a science point of view once you make that suspension of disbelief. So I think that to some extent, as long as you play fair along those lines, it's okay. Now I just got, what was the question?
Are they better? Are these more accurate?
So a lot of it will just depend on how well they're incorporated into the story or making use of it. I think that there were these issues of what used to be called like hard science fiction, where, again, as you say, one slight change. Oh, we have this unlimited energy source, but then everything else is, okay, we can't break the speed of light limit, or things like that. Sometimes those make, boring stories. The science in these things is, in some cases, like window dressing, and in other cases can be essential to moving the story along. And like time travel, you mentioned, right? One character who has, I didn't initially try to give a miracle exemption to the laws of nature, is Superman. Because you think, oh, how could you possibly account for all his powers? After my book came out, another physics professor wrote an article on the unified theory of Superman's powers that proposed that what he's able to do is change the inertia of anything that he's in contact with or near. And we'd all be able to lift a car overhead if we could make its mass be the same as a pillow. And we'd all be bulletproof if we could make the mass of bullets be the mass of a speck of dust, right? So in some sense, it does kind of work that way. And then from that, the fun part, at least for me, is taking these ideas and seeing where else does it lead to. I figured out a way that is completely consistent with general relativity, how Superman is able to make time go backwards by flying rapidly around the Earth. You can read all about it. Who says this isn't the Marvel Age of shameless plugs? And it involves things called Tipler cylinders and all. But these are solutions. I mean, talk about reality, stranger than fiction. There was a paper published in Physical Review, 1974, by Frank Tipler, a physics professor at the University of Maryland, College Park, where he figured out that, consistent with Einstein's theory, you could build a time machine. And he lays out exactly how to do it. and it's rather simple. You take the mass of 3 black holes and stretch it into an infinitely long cylinder. You have it rotate at near the speed of light. It induces massive dragging, what's called frame dragging, of space-time. And by traveling in certain spiral trajectories around it, you will actually wind up back before you left. And it is a legitimate solution to Einstein's equations. And if Superman is able to change the inertia of the mass, the curvature of space-time of things near him, then obviously that's what he's doing. And leave the details of the trajectory as an exercise to the reader. You didn't know there was going to be homework, but.
The short answer I would say is no. I don't think that. I don't think that more accurate science makes more, a better movie.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. Something that I'm really interested in is psychology, psychiatry. We interviewed a psychiatrist from the Mayo Clinic about Norman Bates. And we talked about this idea of, it used to be called split personality, but now it was then coined dissociative identity disorder. And he was very blunt in his description of that. That's not a thing anymore. That's not a thing. Which I was like, but I've read all these books and seen all these movies with this being a thing. That being said, I think there's a responsibility, especially when it comes to psychology and things like that, as we know more and we are more informed in science. There's a responsibility to keep there an accuracy in whatever fiction you're writing when it comes to how that could affect people. And so I think that there's a responsibility there that ethically we need to make sure that we have good science when it comes to things like that. That being said, I'm all for monsters and demons and all the things that have no place in science. It sure is fun.
Speaking of ethics, Agatha Christie, we wrote a book on the science of Agatha Christie in her books and movies, adaptations, and she was very accurate scientifically with her chemistry and with her poisons. I'm not saying you should go poison someone, but if you wanted to, read an Agatha Christie book and you know how to do it, don't do it. But she knew, and she had worked with pharmacists, and she had worked in World War II, World War I. I'm forgetting now. Anyway, she knew what she was talking about, and she wrote it very accurately. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm gonna make up this thing about a poison. It was real, and so I think in that sense too, it's okay. This thing could actually happen.
Mentioning in a second here, mentioning the Agatha Christie and her use of poisons reminds me that, like, especially in the mystery genre, I think also in science fiction and superheroes, there's often a lot of rip from the headline obsession with what's the latest technologies, the latest theories. These authors take it, well, how can I make a mystery plot based around this? Or how can I turn this to 11 and make this into a superpower? Basically, there was this new scientific paper that's out with this new technology. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in which, and some of these new technologies or theories turn out to have been wrong or incorrect, and you can go off in some weird directions there. But can you guys talk about some of the ways in which new seeming ideas at the time have influenced fiction, maybe acquired a life of their own through fiction?
Absolutely. So something that we wrote about in The Science of Stephen King, Science of Agatha Christie, and our upcoming The Science of Alfred Hitchcock, shameless plug.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, go for it.
Is that there real things that were happening in the world, real headlines inspired these stories. And so Stephen King reading about the government doing tests on children created the Institute. And, Stranger Things is directly born out of that idea too. And so I think that all art reflects the time that it is created in and the things that we're thinking about and reflecting on and what's important to us. And so I think that it's so prevalent, more prevalent than people realize.
We were walking around downstairs and we were so excited to see Mary Shelley represented at Frankenstein. We talk about her a lot. We wrote a book called The Science of Women in Horror, and obviously she's a huge part of that. And it got me thinking about ethics again, and how at that time the idea that somebody was going to take body parts and make a monster was both absurd, but also very much in this part of life where the industrialism was coming, and it felt like science was really moving forward fast. For somebody like Mary Shelley, it felt like something that could be possible. And so obviously it's not possible. But when we look at transplants and different things like that, it's sort of crazy to see how we have kind of created our own Frankenstein's monsters. I mean, you could even say that about AI. But it's sort of cool to see her perspective as a woman who grew up in a time that was, she was very steeped in literature and art. And here we are talking about literature and art and how it sort of circumvents with science. And I think, well, she's the queen, but I just think it's very cool.
That's great from what you both said. Reflecting the times, absolutely. When Superman first appeared, the very first person in Action Comics #1, 1938, the very first person Superman roughs up, a Washington lobbyist. He's fighting crooked politicians, sweatshop owners, people who run unsafe coal mines, slum landlords. 1938, the Depression. He's giving voice to a lot of the frustration that people feel. In a few years, he's the source of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He starts fighting people like Toyman or Brainiac who want to take over the planet or the solar system, but will leave the U.S. corporate power structure safely undisturbed. That's a separate issue. And the other thing that you mentioned about ethics that resonates a lot for me, because one of the things that I find appealing, and I think also is why the superheroes, especially now with the movies and TV shows, have reached a wider audience, is that they're kind of almost a nice genre of a literature for ethics. Okay? You get struck by lightning and bitten by a radioactive wombat or something, and you gain these powers. How do you use them? For selfish reasons or to help other people? Are you ever off the clock? We would all run into a burning building to save our family, loved ones. We'd all probably hesitate, if not just for a second, to save perfect strangers. And that's, a rational response. But there are people who do this, they're firemen. You say, well, they're paid to do it. Well, there's volunteer firemen. And in some sense, the superheroes are like the ultimate volunteer firemen. They work out issues of what do you owe other people, what's your responsibilities. And at the end of the story, the bad guy gets punched in the face. So, yeah, exactly.
So we'll talk a little bit more about some of these examples, but let's say people in our audience here are watching a movie, it's a horror film or a superhero film or a science fiction film. You see something on screen, you guys want to learn, what's the science behind it? Is this real? Is this something that can be actually done? Something that needs just one exception to be done? Something that's totally ludicrous? How would you guys recommend people go about researching after they come out of a movie or a book or something like that, find out what's the real science?
Gee, I don't know. Wait a second. Here. Yeah, all these years in graduate school are turning into a prop comic. The internet is a great resource. A friend of mine was the science consultant for the Big Bang Theory, professor at UCLA. And we get the script and they leave little blanks for some technobabble stuff. And he was responsible for the equations that were on the whiteboard every week on the TV show. And it was like accurate science that actually related to what was going on in the story. And then he had a blog that week he would talk about, what went on in the story and what was on the whiteboard. And he would always complain to me every week, the actors are standing in front of the best part of the show. But the internet, other resources, and just even debating or arguing with your friends about things. And the fun part, the idea of a one-time numerical exemption to account for what you're seeing is to some extent what is done in best cases in science. In that, as Enrico Fermi said, if your observation agrees with your expectation, you've made a measurement. If your observation disagrees with your expectation, you've made a discovery. And we all want to make discoveries. But that also suggests that you went in with an expectation. You had something you expected to see, and you saw something different. And those expectations are based on your assumptions. So you have to then figure out, what do I have to change in order to account for what I just observed in the lab? And so that will be the fun part. What would I have to change to be able to control the weather? And you get to the issue of, well, what drives the weather? And at the end of the day, it's temperature variations in the atmosphere. And that would be the power, to be able to control temperature variations in the atmosphere. So it doesn't sound like, oh, I have weather powers now. It's like Mr. Thermal Gradient. But it's kind of fun to try to see if you can work these things out that way.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky to obviously have the internet at our fingertips.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And also, yes, I will say that Kelly and I have written 7 books about this, so that is a good place to start. Yeah.
Too many to bring out.
Sorry. But also, I found out today that here at the Bakken Museum, you can request books about natural history. They have the first edition of Frankenstein here, and you can you can request these books and go up to the library and really have that tactile experience. Kelly and I are big fans of dusty libraries, so don't be afraid to do that as well. And I think just getting out and going into a museum like this too, and experiencing history and science from sort of a social public aspect is good too.
As Leonardo DiCaprio said in Titanic, as he described Kate Winslet, I was thought you were more of an indoor girl, and yes, we're more of a girl. We like to read, we like to write, we like to do that research, and so we always obviously start with the internet, but in our books, we've done a lot of interviews, so interviewing experts, interviewing a variety of people and viewpoints, like you were saying, James, with the debating and talking, and so sometimes we go down a rabbit hole and we're like, these people hunt ghosts. Like, what does that mean? And maybe we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but then we discover things that are scientifically based that they're doing. And so I think it is opening your mind to observations versus inferences, and not just assuming, well, this thing could never happen, or I'm not going to talk to that person because I don't believe in that or bias, but instead be curious.
Outdoors is where the car is.
Yeah, there you go. That's how we get to car.
Of course, the danger of doing your own research is sometimes you can discover incorrect things too. So let's talk about the incorrect things for a second. You guys maybe each give an example from your research of an incorrect scientific fact that got featured in a movie or a book, and then now people take it as gospel because they saw it in this fictional movie. There's something that maybe, if anyone wants to volunteer to go first. Or just more broadly some bad science from films that particularly you find either particularly interesting or annoying.
I guess I'm thinking of kind of to go back to what I was saying about psychology. I think a lot of horror movies have bad psychology in them and are sort of like, well, this person's depressed, so now they're gonna become a slasher or something like that. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, there's some bridges we're crossing that are not so great, and now in 2025 we have sort of a better idea of how mental health works, and so that's kind of what comes to my mind. I mean, I don't even know of a specific movie that I'm thinking of, but there's some bad science that exists in horror, I will admit it.
Yeah.
As much as I would.
I'm glad you went, because then it gave me a chance to think of something.
Okay, good.
You had mentioned earlier, and I agree with you, that getting the science really right doesn't necessarily mean anything, but getting the science very wrong can, again, by taking you out of the movie, Prometheus, with the way that these biologists were behaving in an exoplanet situation. Okay, Avengers, Infinity War. Thanos wants to achieve balance in the universe, snap of the Infinity Gauntlet, and wipe out half the population. And that we'll get back to more of a golden age. Right now, the population of the Earth is about roughly 8 billion people. The last time it was 4 billion people was all the way back in 1974. And we remember what a golden age that was. It's such an incredibly stupid plan that, and moreover, there's all these animal species that if you wiped out half of them, they would either go extinct or run wild because now their predators are gone, and they would destroy other fauna and flora. So it made as you could like double the amount of food, but anyway, that would be what I would say.
And I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but something that we do when we research and write our books is if something isn't interesting for us, we're not going to write about it.
Yeah,
because if we're not excited and if this isn't a path that we want to go down, why would our readers want to? So I think just stick with what's interesting.
All right, let's see. Do we want to have anything else you guys wanted to say that I didn't get a chance to ask you? Can we jump to audience questions? All right, so if anyone has any questions you want to ask any of the members of our panel, I'll ferry the mic out to you. The working mic.
Hi, so what you were saying, maybe specifically the thing about the soldering iron, do you have any like super niche things that you always notice whether or not they're right? Like, there's someone I have seen on the internet who every time who will rank all of like the corsetry, like if it's accurate or not. Like, there's someone who does sword fights, or like I noticed in like the Owl House, like there was a sewing machine. And I was like, that's how a sewing machine is used. Heck yes. Like, what's that?
Okay, I have two quick ones. One is, and when I did a little bit of science consulting, I tried to get them to do this. A lot of times you'll see on whiteboards in professors' offices a collection of random, complicated-looking equations that have no connection to each other. It's like, oh, it's the Schrodinger equation, which looks very complicated. It's not like we have to write it down, otherwise we won't remember what it is. So that is one little pet peeve. The other one is kind of more physiological, and it has nothing to do with superhero movies or even horror movies. But whenever they show someone sleeping, and they get a phone call in the middle of the night, they turn on the light so that you can see them acting.
Right.
And because it's a movie set, their eyes are not massively dilated, so they don't have to shield their eyes from this bright light that's shining. And that bugs the heck out of me.
Now I'm gonna see that every time.
No, that's good.
Thanks, science.
Yeah. If I could spoil one thing for you.
I have a background in literature, so I think for me it's words, and when words are used before people use them, that always kind of bothers me. That usually that is my thing probably.
Two things. I'm a teacher, a professor at a college, and in every movie there's a college class, everyone's getting up and leaving, and they're like, "Hey, this thing is due." That doesn't happen. Like,
Read chapters 2 and 3.
No, that doesn't happen. And the other thing that bothers me, again, when people are sleeping, especially in hospital beds, and their head is like propped up like this so we can see them, it's like, no one would lay comfortably like that. That's not accurate.
Other questions?
Yeah, and this probably dates me because I'm in my 70s, but I have always been fascinated with the Twilight Zone. And I think of one particular, I don't know if most of you have watched the Twilight Zone, but this plane is flying, and all of a sudden it loses altitude, and they don't have any connection with anyone on Earth. And all of a sudden, then they regain, and then they're flying from London to New York. They look down and they see dinosaurs. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then they get a little more altitude and they're looking down, they see the city of New York, and it's the, I think, 1939 World's Fair. So I'm just wondering, this was in the ages when we're starting to think about NASA, flying, going to the moon, and also there's history in this. And the way that it ends, and you were talking about this, how you could make some assumptions of things that happen, because it leaves you in the Twilight Zone. And I think the Twilight Zone was, I mean, I watch a lot of that, my daughter knows this. I watch a lot of these, and it just amazes me how Rod Serling, he used science, as you are saying, and he also used popular science. So this started many years ago, and it's just advanced over the years, but there's a lot of history to this.
Yep.
One interesting thing, a lot of these old paranormal movie like the Twilight Zone is that things like the Bermuda Triangle or stuff like that.
Right.
You don't hear about the Bermuda Triangle since GPS satellites got invented.
That's a good point.
There's a lot of stuff like that like were relics of a past day when we weren't as good at measuring and observing things.
And it's also like the popular meme that we all thought growing up that quicksand was be much more of a problem than it really is.
Yeah, exactly, yes,
In Fantasy Island, in every show I ever watched, it's like, they're stuck in quicksand.
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk about Twilight Zone.
I just was gonna say that I named my Roomba, my Roomba that cleans. I named it Serling because I feel like Rod Serling would love. He would just. I think about this like once a week. Like, what would he think about the science we have now? And like, what sort of? I feel like Jordan Peele did a good job when he did a Twilight Zone remake and was sort of looking at things from the perspective of now. But I feel like Rod Serling, I would love to get his perspective on everything that's happening in the world right now. But yeah, he was a master.
The one thing you mentioned about these shows being products of their time, right? Superhero comic books, like from the 30s and 40s, a lot of times you got their powers from this, ancient artifact that they found, in the Far East, or the world was a much bigger place. There were a lot of unexplored areas. The Bermuda Triangle type things, South America, the jungles of South America, and so you could believe that there would be some sort of mystical artifacts. By the time you get to the 50s and 60s, it's radioactivity, right? And it's kind of obvious as where that came from. And then in the 2000s, a lot of it came to be genetic engineering and mutations, and now it's a little bit more nanotechnology. And so in a lot of cases, it's kind of like also the monster stories of being able to, like, by naming or facing the thing that you're afraid of, you kind of control it a little bit in some ways.
Other question?
I think it was yeah.
I can just get out of there.
Being recorded.
Okay. So I personally love bad science fiction movies. Like, I just watched The Core last night. What are your guys' top favorite bad science movies?
My favorite bad science/horror movie is Invasion of the Blood Farmers. Because people come from outer space and they harvest people. No, it's so cheesy, it's so bad, but there's science.
I'm really into what is it about big bugs, like big insects, like them, or I don't know what it is, and I do like the 50s ones, like them, where it's like you can see how they made like a little miniature town, and then they just put a tarantula on it. I do love those.
George, I think it was George Powell who made a lot of science fiction disaster movies. There was one like where worlds collide, And there was one crack in the world where they were doing some deep drilling experiment to tap geothermal energy, and it hit something unstable, and basically, like, a crack propagated through the planet and lifted up, for reasons, like a second moon going on.
Everyone does.
And I remember as a kid thinking that was really awesome. And when I talked to my colleagues in the Earth Science department, if I ever want to see their heads explode, it's a great thing to bring up.
We have one more question.
I've got one. So, you're talking a lot about how, getting the science right in the stories and so forth. So, sort of spinning that around, can you talk about or think of examples where stories or art have inspired or sparked the curiosity of scientists and led to something because of that?
As Meg touched on earlier, the Scully effect in the X-Files actually led a lot of women identifying people to go into STEM fields and become medical doctors and go into chemistry. And so I think that's an example of this scientist, this not a real doctor, a fictional doctor on screen. And Gina Davis's institute, if she can see it, she can be it. That's their motto. And so I think it is that inspiration of, hey, I could do that.
Yeah, like think of all the people who saw Dr. Scully on the X-Files, like kick ass, because she does. And they were like, I want to be that in real life. And so yeah, I love that. That's what comes to mind. I mean, I think that scientists have forever been interested in sort of art that they find. And I was just at Stonehenge. I had the pleasure of doing that. And I can't imagine a better example of art or whatever it is. We still don't entirely know. Being an inspiration for, not only historical research, but scientific research and what the heck that is.
I'm glad you brought up Scully again, because one thing that I think the X-Files missed an opportunity. A lot of times in the stories, there's some unexplained phenomena. Scully is coming in with a scientific explanation. Mulder says, no, it's got to be, some paranormal thing. And at the end, it's always paranormal. Once Scully should have been right. And once it would have been like, no, it's just the groundskeeper, Mr. Henderson. But
Scooby-Doo is the anti-X-Files.
they could have at least once given her a win.
I agree.
Not so much that they have inspired the scientists working on it, but one thing that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime are, like when Iron Man shoots his repulsor rays or jet boots, you don't see him push a button or give a voice command. He thinks it and it happens. And in the comics, it's explained that he has a cybernetic helmet. This is real. Scientists have developed, and they don't have to go into the brain, they just sit as a cap, sensors that pick up the very weak electromagnetic radio waves that your brain generates because of the ionic currents. And they're amplified, and with proper training, there's videos. Professor Bin he used to be at the University of Minnesota, now he's at Carnegie Mellon. His graduate students are piloting a remote control helicopter, like a drone, through an obstacle course without a joystick or any controls, but thinking of where they want it to go. And so, and now they're not trying to make an Iron Man suit, they're trying to treat paralysis. No, they're trying to treat paralysis, develop better prosthetic devices. And this is the thing that is inspiring from these movies and TV shows, and going back to the Twilight Zone and earlier, that the world is a knowable place, and we can face our monsters. And because to some extent, what we're discovering, the discoveries are ethically neutral. It's gravity, it exists. You can use it, for good or for bad. And the same thing with electromagnetism, obviously. And so when people get electrocuted or shocked, it's bad. I don't think we want to live in a world without electricity. And so, these shows kind of all can inspire us and lead us out to realize that it's a really cool world out there.
All right, well, let's give a big round of applause for all our panelists. Hold out by going down the line again and having everyone giving everyone a chance to promote your books, your projects, where people can find you. My name's David Montgomery, as I said. I'm a journalist. I also have a history podcast about 19th century France, which does delve occasionally into some of the scientific stuff. It's called The Siècle. I won't bother spelling it. Just if you search David Montgomery History Podcast, that's probably the easiest way to find it. But why don't the three of you talk about your projects and where people can find you?
All right, we are both on social media, Kelly Florence and Meg Hoftel. I'll talk about our first 4 books, you can talk about the last 4, let's see if we can remember. Science of Monsters, Science of Women in Horror, Science of Stephen King, Science of Agatha Christie.
Oh, that was out of order. Science of Witchcraft, Science of Alfred Hitchcock, Travels of Terror, a travel book I saw is downstairs. That is apropos for the season. So what did I miss?
Sure.
And Science of Serial Killers, of course.
Well, in my day job, I'm an alma mater physics professor at the University of Minnesota. And so that's where you can find me. I've written The Physics of Superheroes, The Amazing Story of Quantum Mechanics, that talks about how we were promised jetpacks and flying cars, and we got cell phones and laptop computers instead. And then The Physics of Everyday Things, which follows you around your day, and every time you interact with technology, I explain how it works. And now The Physics of Superheroes goes Hollywood.
And if any of the books sounded interesting to you guys, you're in luck because there's a book signing downstairs right after this. So feel free to mingle, say hello, and join them downstairs at book signing. Thank you all.
And thank you, David, for a great job.